Chapter 10C, One World Trade Organization. The more pro-globalist organizations the proponents of the Great Plan can create and control, the more they are able to entangle the hapless sheeple in their growing worldwide web of control. Our bought and paid for members of Congress were nice enough to sign us up for membership in the highly treasonous WTO, for example. Although not a stated goal of the WTO, one of its primary purposes is to help promote the Great Plan. This is accomplished on two fronts. The first is to line the pockets of the owners of the multinational global corporations, also known as the stockholders, also known as the New World Order crowd, by maximizing their marketing potential. The second way is by the gradual destruction of the Western nations' economies, by transferring jobs out of high-paying Western nations to slave-wage-paying third-world countries. This was also the purpose of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, enacted in the early 1990s. NAFTA came before the formal creation of the WTO, but helps accomplish the exact same two goals I just outlined above. We're going to talk about NAFTA here shortly. The people participating in the Great Plan at the legislative level, whether they are, quote, Americans, unquote, placed in our Congress via the money powers, or German, British, French, whatever, don't have a single shred of commitment to the countries they are from. They are nearly all pro-globalist, bought and paid for, sold their soul traitors, and whatever it takes to break down the barriers to their precious, all-powerful, one-world government that they think will have a place for them and their family, they will do. The One World Trade Organization is not a particularly new entity. It just has a more modern-sounding name, one that trumpets the fact that we are nearing completion of the Great Plan of global control. The WTO morphed out of something called GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which itself came out of the Bretton Woods Agreement we already talked about, along with two of the other three pillars of world financial control, the IMF and World Bank, with the Bank of International Settlements the third pillar. GATT, which was created in 1947 by a handful of countries, including the United States, was never a legally binding contract, but merely an advisory organization. The proponents of the Great Plan would have to run with GATT until the societies of the world were sufficiently tranquilized with inane TV shows, drugs, video games, and other forms of pure distraction so they could operate out in the open, but effectively under the radar, as no one is paying attention to these things these days. This all changed in 1995 when GATT was replaced by the World Trade Organization. The WTO acts as a global trade Supreme Court, always siding with the multinational corporations over individual countries' best wishes and interests. The World Trade Organization is purely an Illuminati-controlled elitist group of international economic power brokers whose only goals are to grab up as much money as possible, and money equals power, mind you, and to break down the economies of the Western nations so they can be absorbed into the global government. Subjects of interest now subject to WTO authority include, but are not limited to, intellectual property rights, known to us as patents, all types of agricultural activity, our food and water, and global telecommunications activities, to name but a few economic activities now controlled trans-border by the WTO. Since the World Trade Organization was able to be pushed through without much, if any, opposition by the citizens who weren't paying attention, the WTO proponents at the United Nations are now clamoring for a World Development Authority, a formal international central bank, an international development fund, and a World Food Authority. They are making a grab right this second for as much control as they can get before you and your neighbors wake up and smell what the New World Order is cooking. So what has the WTO been up to lately? The World Trade Organization ruled on June 29, 2012, that United States country of origin labeling provisions violated global trading rules and were unjustly harming agricultural commerce between Canada, Mexico, and the United States, a la NAFTA guidelines. The United States have been requiring, for consumer safety, that food processors identify the countries from which livestock and produce originate. Canada and Mexico argued to the WTO that the provisions imposed not only prejudice against their products, but unfair cost on their exports, reducing their competitiveness. WTO judges agreed that the policies meant beef and pork from Canada and Mexico were treated less favorably than the same U.S. products, and ruled against our country, overriding our sovereignty. See how that works now? Now we're going to have less safe products and increased foreign competition because of the WTO's existence. The ruling was naturally applauded by Canada and Mexico. Quote, "With this ruling, this process has been concluded in a successful and definitive manner for Mexico," unquote, the country's Secretary of the Economy said in a statement. Quote, "The Mexican government reiterates its commitment to fight any practice that goes against the international commitments that have been made by our trading partners and that unduly disadvantage our producers," unquote, the government agency added. Quote, "We are pleased with today's World Trade Organization appeal decision in favor of our livestock industry," unquote, Canadian Agricultural Minister Jerry Ritz said. Quote, "Our government has always stood with our cattle and hog producers in order to create a stronger and more profitable integrated North American livestock industry," unquote. By this ruling, you soon, if not already, will not know if the meat you are eating was raised on a wholesome family farm in the United States or in a polluted cesspool somewhere in Third World Mexico. Quote, "Today's," in parentheses June 29th, ruling makes very clear that these so-called trade pacts have little to do with trade between countries, but rather impose outrageous limits on the most basic consumer safety policies on which we all rely," unquote, said Lori Wallach, Director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. Quote, "The WTO announcing that big agribusiness corporations must be allowed to sell mystery meat here, despite U.S. consumers and Congress demanding these labels, is yet another example of outsourcing our legal system to international commercial bodies that push corporate interest," unquote. The WTO isn't stopping there, though. They have had an agenda in the works for many years now to eliminate all country of origin labeling for all products, and primarily have this plan aimed at hiding how many of the products we are consuming are coming out of China these days. The more stuff that comes from China equals the less stuff being produced in the United States, equals a continued path to the destruction of the United States as a global power. How would you like to go shopping one of these days and discover that every product you looked at, the label said, quote, "made in the world," unquote, instead of made in China, made in Mexico, made in the USA, etc.? The labels on the products we purchase here in the United States that names the country of origin may soon be gone. In 2011, Andreas Maurer, chief of the WTO's International Trade Statistics section, said, quote, "In the past 2 or 3 years there has been huge momentum to get the necessary information that would be used to rationalize elimination of country of origin labeling," unquote. On April 16, 2012, the European Commission and WTO held a conference to mark the launch of the World Input-Output Database, the WIOD. This effectively moved the WTO another step closer to eliminating country of origin labeling. Since a large amount of today's traded products are not produced in a single location, but are the end result of a series of steps carried out in many countries around the world, the WTO believes the time is right to eliminate country of origin labeling. As an example of what is happening is that cars and trucks produced by General Motors, Ford, or whoever may have parts and assemblies of parts coming from several other countries, including China. The WTO wants to adopt the, quote, made in the world, unquote, logo for all products on the grounds that global supply chains have made country of origin labeling inaccurate and obsolete. The WTO's Made in the World initiative is part of the process of, quote, re-engineering global governance, unquote, said WTO Deputy Director General Alejandro Jara, celebrating the launching of the World Input-Output Database. Quote, with the advent and rise of global supply chains, it is misleading to rely solely on gross trade flows as a measure of a country's competitive position. As companies have created global supply chains, attributing the full commercial value of imports to the last country of origin can skew bilateral trade balances, pervert the political debate on trade imbalances, and may lead to wrong and counterproductive decisions, unquote. For consumers in the United States, made in the world labels wouldn't allow you to protect your family from the substandard, tainted, harmful, and even life-threatening products coming from China. Remember the toxic Chinese drywall? Remember the melamine chemicals in the Chinese dog food? I think it was in baby food as well. That was me. These labels wouldn't allow you to trace the source of a recalled product, and we would ultimately be left holding the bag of side effects, be they monetary or health-related. I could go on for pages listing products from China that have been yanked off the shelves in recent years. If this is implemented, you also wouldn't be able to support American workers and businesses by buying made in the USA. These changes are coming, and soon. Bottom line, every action taken by the proponents of the Great Plan are designed to promote and advance the agenda of the One World Government. This is why they started grouping countries together a la the European Union and the African Union. What? You didn't know that an African Union was already in place? It is. They are currently working on creating the Asian Union, the South American Union, and the North American Union. Once the countries of the world have their borders broken down with these unions, that will make it easier to then merge the unions into one all-encompassing global body, either under the UN or under a newly developed global governmental body. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. Kind of what was going through my mind there, just here and there, about this. It's awful. But things that, just because something is made in the United States, doesn't mean it's good for you or higher quality. But still, we need to always know where something originates from. But I'm just thinking about Monsanto's corn, and there's just different things that they just feel free to poison us with, that a lot of countries have banned, going into their countries, at least for now, because with this WTO, it's being implemented worldwide, but the main target is always the United States. And if it should be apparent by now that if you die as a result of it, it's no big deal to them. I mean, it's really kind of what they want in a way, as long as they're not exposed to the point to where somebody actually, gathers their like-minded people and does something about it. So, it's just insidious when you think about all this. But anyway, that's it for that one. And next time we'll be picking up on the chapter Unionizing Mankind. And so we'll be talking to you then.
The candidates will have an opportunity to make a closing statement. So, President Bush, I think you said it earlier, let's get it on.
Let's go.
And I think the first question is over here.
Yes, I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Perot. What will you do as president to open foreign markets to fair competition from American business and to stop unfair competition here at home from foreign countries so that we can bring jobs back to the United States?
That's right at the top of my agenda. We've shipped millions of jobs overseas, and we have a strange situation because we have a process in Washington where after you've served for a while, you cash in, become a foreign lobbyist, make $30,000 a month, then take a leave, work on presidential campaigns, make sure you got good contacts, and then go back out. Now, if you just want to get down to brass tacks, first thing you ought to do is get all these folks who've got these one-way trade agreements that we've negotiated over the years and say, fellas, we'll take the same deal we gave you. And they'll gridlock right at that point because, for example, we've got international competitors who simply could not unload their cars off the ships if they had to comply. You see, if it was a two-way street, just couldn't do it. We have got to stop sending jobs overseas. To those of you in the audience who are business people, pretty simple. If you're paying $12, $13, $14 an hour for factory workers, and you can move your factory south of the border, pay $1 an hour for labor, hire a young 25, that's assuming you've been in business for a long time, you've got a mature workforce. Pay $1 an hour for your labor, have no health care, that's the most expensive single element making a car, have no environmental controls, no pollution controls, and no retirement, and you don't care about anything but making money, there will be a giant sucking sound going south. So if the people send me to Washington, the first thing I'll do is study that 2,000-page agreement and make sure it's a two-way street. One last point here. I decided I was dumb and didn't understand it, so I called a who's who of the folks who've been around it. And I said, why won't everybody go south? They said, we'll be disruptive. I said, for how long? I finally got them up for 12 to 15 years. And I said, well, how does it stop being disruptive? And that is when their jobs come up from $1 an hour to $6 an hour and ours go down to $6 an hour, then it's leveled again. But in the meantime, you've wrecked the country with these kinds of deals. We've got to cut it out.
Thank you, Mr. Perot. I see that the President